What strikes me most in your movie is the aspect of humanizing the other, and we've talked about that a number of times. I've heard the word friend mentioned so many times in the movie, sort of later on in your conversations with these individuals, and also how personal and subjective perspectives can be entirely different from group perspective and forgotten from one way or rationalized away from one way to the other. And of course also recognize that many things we haven't seen, things that happened off camera, things that were cut out in the final version. So really my first question is, how did you feel doing this, and how has your experience been sort of going through this, first receiving a lot of the online sort of hatred and then coming face to face with these individuals?
It was, I have to be honest, it was terrifying. You know, I've, as I said earlier as well, I've been afraid of men like this most of my life. So then to find myself in very small rooms with them was unnerving. But at the same time, I'm sort of obsessively curious, not just about what people do, but why people do the things that they do. So I was intensely interested in what drives them. And I was also deeply, deeply interested in, you know, when we're talking about the other, again, having had the experiences growing up being the other, one thing that I was committed to even before making the film was that I refused to do that to somebody else. I know what it feels like to be demonized. I know what it feels like to be the other. I know what it feels like to be on the outside. I know what it feels like to be stereotyped. The last thing I'm going to do is to try and do that to somebody else. Even if they don't deserve that kind of respect, it doesn't matter. It's at some point as a society, as individuals, we have to decide what kind of human beings we want to be, what kind of societies we want to build, and what kind of principles and values we believe in. And those principles and values, to me, only matter if you're willing and able to extend them to people who don't deserve it. I think for me to extend those values to you or to Viljar is very easy. It's very easy. We like each other. We probably see the world, you know, fairly similarly to each other. That's not when it matters. That's not when it's tested. It's truly tested when you're confronted with people who hold completely different views than you, and some of them hold completely unacceptable views. But the thing is, if we don't engage in the way that I'm suggesting, then what is the difference between us and men like that? So what was it like for me? It was terrifying. And it was, ultimately, it was really heartening. I started the film pessimistic and afraid, and I left the film hopeful, having made friends, believe it or not. If you would have told me a couple of years ago, Deeyah, you're going to meet with some skinheads and some, you know, fascists and this and that, and you're going to become friends, I would laugh at you. And secondly, I would be really offended and insulted that you would think that I could do that. But when it comes to demonizing the other, you know, I was liberated from my fear of them. Once I got to see them as human beings, once I got to see their brokenness, once I got to see their conflict and confusion and contradictions that they hold, as all human beings hold. And the same happened for several of them. You know, they were no longer able to demonize me and view me as the other. Because we got to know each other. I mean, it's as cliche and as simple as that, but it really is. That human connection is what it's needed.
And luckily, some of the answers are sometimes very straightforward and very cliche and very simple. And I think it's good to see that. Viljar, I'm very curious in your reaction to watching this, particularly because, as you mentioned in your story, you've had both good and bad experiences with media. Some of the media that were immediately responding, just filming what was going on. It was not a helicopter that was trying to rescue you. And I'm sure also in the immediate aftermath. So I'd be curious to hear some of your reflections on the movie in particular, but also what media can do positively and negatively in this space.
Well, first of all, it's so inspiring and so good for me to see the movie, because these are people I'm afraid of as well, and these are people that are threatening me for my life, because I said that you shouldn't burn down mosques, you know, and or churches, and they're calling me like Judas and that kind of things, because to them I'm a traitor, you know, for my kind. So it's weird, because the threats I get, it's really threats to you, you know, in a sense, and that's very, very special, you know. So for me to just see you know, it's meeting persons, talking to persons, and say, okay, they have never had a friend or talked to anybody like you. And then they say, yeah, but you can't deport a friend, can you? You know. And for me, talking to that kind of persons as well is the same feeling, because one of the guys was threatening me a lot back in 2013, and media called him, and then he heard that I had heard what he had written about me, and he called me to say sorry because it wasn't meant for me, and I didn't actually realize that I was going to read it, you know. And that's the way the media can be good, I think, to, you know, okay, wake up, these words you're writing, that these are real. But the thing about the media, because the sad truth is that these people committing these kind of attacks are getting, in a short term, exactly what they want, because they are sensationalized. You know, the same way when a celebrity dies, you go through their life story, you go through their family, you talk to their neighbors, all that kind of stuff happens every time someone commits these types of crimes. And we as humans seems to be really obsessed about learning about these people doing this kind of stuff. And I believe it is because we want to see monsters. We want to see people disconnected from us, that's not like us, that's somebody else. How couldn't they do it? When the truth is, I think that, you know, we are all humans, and it's unfortunate events that makes people doing this. Of thousands of right-wing people writing that they're going to kill me or you or whatever, there's only a very, very small % that's actually capable and going to do it, you know. And I think media is interesting in that respect.
Do you mind if
no,
I add
please,
to that?
please. No, that's what this is for.
Because I think what you're bringing up is absolutely crucial. You know, when we're talking about how to prevent and how to counter, how to respond to extremism in general, I agree with you. I think the media's responsibility is so severe in this. Exactly like you say, it doesn't matter if a young man has joined ISIS or has joined some sort of, you know, neo-Nazi organization. Part of the reason they're doing this is to be seen. It is to be... I mean, I would say that the media ends up glamorizing them by showing how bad and tough and violent and horrific they are, because that speaks to their, that gives them the cover. That covers up for the fact that he is insecure. It covers up for the fact that he is suffering or struggling or in pain or is broken in some way. What extremism provides for all these men, regardless of what type of movement that they subscribe to, is that it provides the perfect escape and the perfect facade for everything else that's wrong in their life. It's very easy to say that what's wrong in my life is the fault of someone Muslim or someone brown or black or Jewish, rather than self-reflecting and looking at your own faults and your own brokenness. And so these movements are providing these incredible outlets for these young men, and then the media is completely and utterly feeding into what it is that they're so desperately craving and the reason for why they're doing it in the first place. Imagine being small and insignificant and powerless and invisible, somebody that nobody cares about, but then they care about you once you do something absolutely monstrous. And again, that goes back to, that says something about us as a society more than it says about these young men. So I agree with you. I think the media has to be much more responsible in how it deals with these guys. One of the responses that I got from the film I did about jihadis, this was 2 young men who'd gone to Syria, British guys actually, and they didn't survive. But they sent me a message saying after that film, because I did the same thing in that film, I wasn't interested in their chest beating, I was interested in their vulnerabilities and their humanity. And their response was, why are you making us look weak? Why are you making us look, we are honorable, we are strong, we are courageous. Why are you making us look just like simple human beings? So there's an answer in there, I think, of how we confront this.
And that leads me beautifully to my second question. Indeed, you've also worked on young violent Islamists, and I can't help but watch the movie, reflect upon our discussion, and see that the things that we talk about here in terms of trust, in terms of humanizing, in terms of really ensuring that these people are part of the fold and are not outside of the community, That's what a lot of practitioners on all sides of the aisle, working on all different types of issues of violent extremism, have been saying, but is not necessarily reflected in the discussions that are often held here or elsewhere at the international, at the political level. So my question to you is, what are some of the similarities and differences? How close are the motivations between groups, between individuals with very different ideas or very different ideologies, but potentially very similar drivers, motivations?
I mean, the experience that I've had working with men who are part of both movements is I have found that the ideology obviously is important, but I've found that in both cases the ideology is much more sort of window dressing. But what lies beneath it, the sort of human drivers and the human needs that are being fulfilled by these men joining these groups is exactly the same. So the initial vulnerabilities that these young men have, the lack of connection, the lack of community, the lack of significance, the lack of purpose, brotherhood, all of that. Is sort of the wound in a way that you start with. Then these ideologies provide you with clear black and white answers for why all this stuff is wrong in your life. And it's always about the other. It's always about it's somebody else's fault. Whether it's the Islamists, it's, we know everybody that they blame, or whether it's the white supremacists, we know everybody that they blame. So it gives you a clear answer. And then how a lot of these groups also recruit, I have found, has been really similar. A lot of people have said to me, Deeyah, what you've done with these guys, this kind of one-on-one interaction and connection, it's not sustainable and it's not scalable. So what sort of solutions other than that do you think we need to have? And I think the solutions ultimately in the long run has to be that. When it comes to recruitment, we have recruiters. I remember when I was researching the jihadi film, you had recruiters sitting online spending hundreds of hours on just one young person. That's incredible. What level of loyalty and bond and friendship and connection you can build with that young person on that much attention. And what is the rest of us doing? Nothing. And these guys as well, I saw the white supremacists. They would help, they would give each other money if you were struggling. If somebody was being evicted from their house, they would be there. They would help them move. They would be there for each other. So I think as the wonderful ambassador from Jordan was saying earlier as well, is there are wounds and gaps in our societies, and in those wounds and gaps is where sort of the infection of extremism resides in that, and it flourishes in that. And that's also where we can disrupt it. Because why is it that these groups are fulfilling the basic human, emotional, psychological needs for our young people, and we are not? So in a way, the picture is much more hopeful than I think we sometimes view it as. Because we view them just as monsters. Once you have a monster in front of you, there's not much you can do. But once you have a person in front of you, a lot more solutions become tangible. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you absolutely did. I think last question for both of you, and then opening it up to the floor, starting with Viljar. I found it striking in the movie, and also just looking at the research and programmatic work that we undertake, that partners, children, time spent in prison, making friends or with people that you weren't friends with before. These are very significant life events that may start to lead people away from either the path that they're on or some of the atrocities that they've already committed. And of course, we saw a number of examples of both formers as well as survivors or family members working to actually prevent violent extremism from taking place. So I'd be very curious from your personal experience working on this topic, how that has been and how you felt supported or not supported, and what kind of things that we as sort of the international community can do to further really emphasize the importance of the role of both survivors as well as potentially formers to sort of speak out. And then similarly in your experience working with these two different groups of people, whether you would equally apply the importance and effect that somebody like Arno has had in the right-wing extremist, violent right-wing extremist realm to violent Islamism or other types of ideologies.
Thank you. First of all, I think what Deeyah is showing in her movie is that, with asking, it's fascinating to me, asking quite basic human questions like, tell me about your family, or tell me about why did you do that, and that's how easy you break people down to be like vulnerable. And that facade that can seem so scary on the outside. It's actually just a part of human emotions, just how easy you get into it. I think that's very, very interesting and very, very a positive thing. I'm glad that you show that, so I'm glad for that. About what, I mean, as a survivor of terrorism and me talking to other victims, the most important thing for us has always been, it's also a basic human emotion actually, and that is, please don't forget what happened, you know. To keep on talking about it, keep on touching it. Don't be afraid to touch it. I feel in Norway we are talking on Utoya as a big, like, the big thing that happened, you know, the big ulykke, accident. You know, not actually talking about the issues lying behind it, not actually going into depth about what kind of questions, what kind of ideology was behind. And for me to you know, my friends died because they believed in something. That's important to me, not because there was some big accident or something. They believed in something. They believed in solidarity, diversity, a greater good. And that, I mean, that goes to not only Norwegians sorry for that attack, but talk to them, remember what happened and why it happened, and try to, as communities, as local communities, but also as governments, deal with it. I think it was so fascinating earlier in the discussion, hearing from New Zealand how they are, you know, in 3 practical things. I'm doing that, and that to prevent this from happening again. It's small things like that, but most importantly, I can't stress this enough, talk about it with the people that it happened to, with people opposed to it, with people that thought it was okay. Talk about it. Never, because it's easy to be afraid of touching it when something so terrible and so that kind of thing happened here.
And I think just following on what Viljar is saying, I think absolutely, I think dialogue is absolutely the essence of all of this. But I also think that it's important to have wider societal conversations admitting that it's difficult to live together. It's all well and good to say that diversity and pluralism and you know, inclusivity is really, really important and it's beautiful and lovely, which it is, and that's the goal. But that's going to require active work from all of us. You know, there are problematic things that happen within various minority communities and also in the majority community, and we have to be able to articulate it, and we have to be able to articulate that sometimes we're afraid of each other, and sometimes we don't understand why you do the things that you do. Why do you pray like that? Why do you eat like that? Why do you look, you know, and we have to, rather than shutting down conversation, we have to ensure that it's okay for people to ask questions, for people to have uncomfortable conversations as well, because I think otherwise we're not really making a true commitment to each other that we actually want to live together side by side respectfully. If we take any of these difficult questions off the table, of the fact that coexistence is hard. So going back to your questions of formers, I think that there are a tremendous amount of young men in both movements who want to leave and who don't find a way out, because the rest of us have written them off. The rest of us have given up on them. So once they leave, we condemn them because you used to be this or you used to be that. So we can't really relate to your loyalties now. We can't really figure it out. And then their former friends, I was going to say bandmates, but their friends also hate them because they're traitors and they've deserted their cause. So these people end up in this no man's land. I remember speaking to, early on, researching this topic, I ended up speaking with a former IRA terrorist, a convicted terrorist. And he said the same thing. He said, look, there were so many points during my activity that he said, I actually wanted to leave, but I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. So this didn't happen in the film. This happened after the film. You know the young man with the swastika tattooed on his chest, Ken? So he called me a few months after the film and said he's left. He's completely renounced and that tattoo, he's now in the process of having it removed. And remember, he said he's never going to break bread with a Jewish person. He's done that. He's joined an all-black congregation. We've become very good friends. I'm going to see him soon. Actually, I mean, he left me a message last night. So I was terrified of him, you know, but that capacity existed within him. And he said, look, Deeyah, I just wanted to tell you, thank you for not giving up on me, and thank you for being kind to me even when I didn't deserve it. That to him was the starting point of it falling apart. And then other people, you know, this black congregation that he's joined, he went there and said, I used to be a part of the, you know, I've been a part of the Ku Klux Klan, I am now a Nazi, and I believe this and this and this. And apparently the people within the congregation came up to him and hugged him afterwards and said, look, we don't like what you stand for, we completely disagree with it, but it takes a lot of courage for somebody like you to stand there and say what you've said. And that was the last straw for him being shown kindness and compassion and respect by people who he thinks are not even human, showing more humanity to him than he's worthy of. That made him start questioning, well then what does that say about me? What kind of a human being am I if those people can have that within them? So anyway, there's a lot of people who do want to leave. There's no structures for them to leave. So I think people exiting extremist movements, we need to create structures for them to leave and have support to rebuild their lives and provide them with alternative communities. And I think former extremists who've already made that journey are a huge part of that solution and that kind of ecosystem that we need to start creating.
Thank you. Let me open it up to the floor. If you have a question, I will point in your direction, and please introduce yourself and ask the question as poignantly and directly as possible. Representative of Italy first.
Do you hear me? Yes. I'm from Italian Mission. I want to commend you for your reaction. And no edit work. My question goes to Ms. Khan. You dedicated the largest part of your work to people coming from middle class, low class, working class, and from very problematic families. And your approach was, in some sense, effective. You touched some nerves, you were able to dialogue with them. But my feeling is that something is very different when we go to the rich young guy you filmed, and the very arrogant way he approached the people in front of his doors seems to go to a different direction. So the feeling is that when you go to a problematic person coming from a difficult situation, you have ground for interaction. You can move some leverage, and you can try to have a dialogue. The feeling from a side is it's very far complicated to do the same thing with the people on the other side, coming from a rich family with a strong position, with the feeling to be a leader. So I am a leader, I don't dialogue with you. Is my feeling wrong?
I think you're right. I think, because I found the same sort of really interesting dynamic of class within this movement. You know, I found that you had the sort of boots on the ground Nazis, the swastika wearing working class guys, and then you had the kind of, I call them the suit and tie racists, the kind of privileged guys. And I agree with you. I found that the motivations between the two were somewhat different. And also what I found quite interesting was the contempt of the rich guys towards their own. Right? So I expect them to hate me and to have problems with me, but I found it fascinating that they had such disrespect and contempt for their own working class guys. In terms of how, and I think their motivations were also slightly different. Like the young man that you're talking about, for him it's much more about power, and for him he's also close in proximity of accessing power. So for him this was about, on one level, about something else, but on another level, it was about the same thing. You know, he wants to be important. He wants to be relevant. He's rich, but I don't know what his childhood's like. I don't know, you know, how much affection or love he's had in his life. I have no idea, but he certainly is incredibly desperate for attention. Desperate for attention. And I think for him, to be quite honest, my gut feeling was, I'm not sure he's even a racist. I get the feeling for him it's a strategic play of it gives him a position within our popular culture. It gives him a place of importance. Speaking of media, he's a genius at pushing the buttons of the media. He knows exactly what to say. He knows exactly how shocking to be and how obnoxious to be to end up in every single glossy newspaper and magazine imaginable. And he loves it. He absolutely loves it. But in answer to your question, I think not every young person who joins these movements is certainly not comes from a poor background. I think that it's the entire spectrum. And also not all of them are broken or vulnerable people. I think you do also have sociopaths. You do have people who have other, that there's other stuff going on. And I don't think, realistically speaking, I don't think that we're ever going to get rid of violent behavior or extremism of any kind completely. But what I do believe, and what I've come to understand in doing these films, is we can reduce it substantially. We can reduce its appeal. And so my kind of attraction to it is that. And that's why I obsessively keep trying to find what all the different drivers are so that we can find antidotes for that.
The representative of Morocco.
Very much. So I would like, of course, to thank our two representatives here who make this very astonishing, really, film, and also their presentation before. I like, by the occasion, also to thank Norway and Jordan for making this opportunity available for us. In your documentary, it was very important for me to notice a few things, that there is the question of dialogue. They don't know who the other is, and there is the notion of courage here, which who is going to make the step to go to the other, to learn from. I personally have never known from inside this group. We read in the press, but to see them the way you depicted them in the documentary, talking about themselves and talking the way they think about the other, is something very important, so that should be included in how to prevent extremism. This is one issue. The second thing is that there is fear. This fear is inside in society, and everybody doesn't show that this fear. The moment you arrive to overcome this psychological fear and go to the other, you can solve the problem. As far as you have fear, you are going to react violently. This is the third element, is the media. And the media is used on both sides. Sometimes it's good to depict what's going on and telling the truth, but sometimes also it's giving wrong ideas. I remember what happened in Utoya when there was the people, 72, I believe, or 69, who died. We as Muslims were waiting to hear, who is it? Yes. Who is it? Oh my God. It's again. And you are from Norway. I have a friend in Norway, and I was going to go to Norway before, to finish my studies. So I have a lot of friends there in Tromsø and in Oslo. So the idea is that we were taken hostage of the media. What are they going to say? And the problem, which I would like to underline here, is that if it were a Muslim, there would be depicting every time. And now, is a Muslim who do it. But afterwards, we hear that psychologically, person he's got some problems. This we have to say it here. We have to talk about these things. Because when it is a Muslim, they are talking about. Terrorism is not only linked to the religion of Islam, it's also in other faiths. Yeah. This is what we have to depict. And as I said, ignorance of the other is something that we have to overcome. And you have made the first step. My question is, was there any help from the government or those who want to, take from your side what you have done, to work on it? Because we see that sometimes the governments are just sitting behind. My ambassador has talked about freedom of expression. Sometimes we misuse this freedom of expression. So this is the idea that I would like to share with you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to say something first. Okay. I agree with everything you've said. I think the media has a huge role to play in this. You know, when I was going to meet with these men, they already have decided that they hate me. They've already decided that. What have they based that decision on? They don't know me. They have never met me. I've never talked to them before, never, you know. So when you ask them, how have you made this decision that I am somebody that deserves violence and that you hate? Well, I read this article in the newspaper, or I saw this on the news, and you people do this, you people do that, Muslims do this, Muslims do that. So where do they know that from? If they've never personally met a Muslim before, where do they hear that from? So the only relationship that they had to a Muslim was whatever they saw in the media. So that should tell us what the media is leaving in the hearts of people, you know? So I agree with you. I think that there's been a lot of irresponsible kind of ways of talking about each other in the media. And I think, you know, a lot of this hatred is absolutely founded on people misunderstanding each other and not really knowing each other. And I mean, the other thing, you know, speaking about Utoya, I share your feeling completely. I remember when it happened, my heart stopped, first of all, for what was going on. And then second question, oh my, and not even question, was, oh, please, 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 let it not be a Muslim. Please don't let it be a Muslim, because I know what's going to happen. Like, my friends are going to get beaten up. You know, somebody's going to get dragged off a bus, or something's going to happen. And I just remember going, oh. And then the minute we saw that it was a blonde and blue-eyed guy, it's like in a creepy sort of way, like a sigh of relief. You know, that I felt, which is kind of sick to kind of say that, but that's how it felt. And then you learn that this white guy was willing to kill white Norwegian children because he hates Muslims that much. That's astonishing. That was an astonishing realization, to realize that you're that hated, that he's willing to slaughter children, you know? So, but again, and I think you should speak about this, is, you know, how people covered and told the story of that event. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Thank you so much, and thank you for, I totally agree with you myself as well. And I remember, I'm going to be honest with you, the first thing I asked my father and my family of when I wake up from a coma was it a Norwegian guy? Was it? Because I had the same, I really, really, you know, in a sick way, I didn't want it to be a Muslim, because we all knew what's going to happen. And I have heard afterwards that in the short amount of hours from the shooting started, the bomb, until it was discovered that he was a Norwegian blonde guy, random Muslim people were beating up in the street in Norway, exactly. In our cities. You know, it just felt so wrong. And for me as a survivor, there was a big debate in Norway whether he was sane or not a year afterwards. And for us, it was very, very important for us to get to grips with that he was sane doing it. You know, he wasn't insane, because I think the thing that you are pointing to is that every time a Muslim does something, it's a terrorist attack. But if a white guy, it's a lone wolf, a sick man, no friends, and you know, it's that, and that's the media's. A part of it is the media's fault, always covering it like that, and a part of it is how we respond and how we talk to it. So, yeah, and I think we have a long way to go, but I feel that we are going in the right direction in that kind of questions. But hopefully we can keep on doing that. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the government question, I don't have enough awareness of what other governments are doing about it. But, you know, looking on the Norwegian side of it, you know, I've seen that there's been no hesitation in confronting it and admitting that it is a problem. And I think that Norway's response to what happened, I think, was exemplary. And that's the strongest feeling that I was left with after, you know, seeing what happened and reading and watching it, was feeling so proud that I'm Norwegian. That my people, my country, refused to become hateful in the face of hatred. And you are a living, breathing, you know, expression of that, is that our humanity is something that we have to hold on to, because that's what they're trying to take from us. You know, they want us to become monstrous as well, and we can't allow that, you know.
Just to finish that, I agree, and I really, really, really hope that the response would have been the same if it was a Muslim. That's all I can say. I really, really hope that. And I'm going to give my country the benefit of the doubt on that question.
All right, I'm going to look around the room for any final questions. We're already a little bit over time. Please raise your hands. I've got one on front here and then one in the back. And that's going to be it. Yes, please.
The United Nations Office on the Prevention of Genocide. And first of all, it's a great movie. Congratulations. It's really, you have a strong courage to have done this. And we can all learn from you. I have two questions. So one question it piggybacks on the comment of the representative of Morocco, and it's the issue of religion that this movie don't touch upon. At a certain point, there is somebody, one of the people you met, who says he's a knight of Christ. So my question is, did any of these people that you ever met for this meeting, has any of these people mentioned the issue of religion and how it's connected to their position? To their political views, and if yes, why you haven't included in your movie? I think I have an answer on that, but I would like to hear from you. My second point is the issue of gender, which it came to it's very strong in your movie. You only shows interviews with men. At certain points, there are women who are part of the movement in the background, the girlfriend of the guy with the swastika on his chest. And there is a lot of there are a lot of discussions on the role of women in Muslim radical groups or violent groups also. But you didn't focus also on the role of women in the right-wing group. So I just wanted you to maybe elaborate a little bit on the issues. Thank you.
Let us take the last question as well and then get a full response to all of them, please.
I represent the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, and I want to thank you very heartfully for your movie. It's really very, very interesting and enlightening. Actually, my question has to do with women as well. So it's very much on the lines that the previous speaker mentioned, and also curious to see if you yourself had interactions with women during your filming, and if you can shed any light on that. Thank you.
So religion and women, we left the easiest topics
exactly.
to the final part of the discussion.
Small,
please.
question. So in terms of religion, yes, some of them did bring up religion, but it was very fleeting. Most of them were much more, speaking about politics is how they wanted to constantly frame it. But some of them would speak about religion. They would say that this is their crusade. Someone would say, this is our crusade against the Muslims. This is just a continuation of what has happened in the past. So this is just the beginning of our crusade. Then the sort of flip side of that, which was bizarre to me, is some of them also expressed real admiration for groups like Daesh and ISIS, basically, and Al-Qaeda and all the groups on that side. And they would say that, one of the guys even said that we want to create white Sharia. Yeah, and so this leads me to the woman's question. What is interesting about both movements is their shared perception of women and their shared dislike of women, feeling that women's rights and human rights have gone far too far, and that we need to reverse back time and go back to a much more strict patriarchal, traditional setup again. So I did meet with some women within the white supremacist movement. I would say that most of their roles were kind of peripheral roles. I didn't come across anyone that were leaders. I did come across one woman who's becoming sort of known on social media. She does some videos and things like that, but she's not kind of an ideological leader in that sense. What I found was that there are women, and there are more women that are joining, but because this movement places women in a very limited role, they believe that this movement believes that there is an imminent race war about to happen. where white people are going to fight everybody else, and as a result, they are going to create a white ethno-state. The role of women within that scenario is going to be either as nurses, but primarily as continuing the white race. So I have to be honest, I mean, to most modern women, that's not a particularly appealing offer, right? So I think that they struggle to recruit women. In many ways, I would say that the Islamist side provide much more empowerment in some ways for women. I mean, they actually provide more agency in a way. You know, you can actually be ahead of this. You can be, you know, a police that can reinforce this type of behavior, or you can actually be a suicide bomber. You can actually be a fighter. You know, so in some ways, they're offering more. It's really, really twisted to think of it that way. So that's what I experienced. I experienced that, yes, there are women, more women are being drawn to it, but their roles are more peripheral. They're the girlfriend of, or some kind of a supportive role to the guy. Does that connect with what you're thinking? And in terms of the religion, does it connect with what you were thinking? Okay.
Let me take this opportunity to really thank both of you, Deeyah, Viljar, for all of the important work that you're doing, for coming here to New York, to the UN, to have this discussion. As you've heard earlier, clapping and applause doesn't happen a lot here, and particularly the discussion on this topic doesn't happen a lot here. And so I hope that today we've planted some seeds to have this discussion, and we'll continue to have this discussion about right-wing violent extremism, but also use reflections on the way that we respond to this threat, on what that tells us and how we respond to other types of violent extremism. And it's the core of the UN's mandate, and particularly of the UNCT and PVE actors' mandate to focus on all types of violent extremism and have the underlying fundamentals in those responses be similar, and the principles being similar. I think it's important that we reflect upon that as well. So let me thank you for being here. Thank everybody for staying on so long, and hope to continue this important discussion. Thank you.